Breaking news on CBS Sports HQ, the NFL upholding Myles Garrett's indefinite suspension for his role in this brawl with Mason Rudolph and the Pittsburgh Steelers. News came out earlier today that Garrett said that a racial slur was used by Mason Rudolph, and he used that in his appeal to the NFL, but there is no reduction in the suspension. Maurkice Pouncey did have his 3-game suspension reduced to 2, but Myles Garrett still suspended indefinitely. All right, let's get much more on this from senior NFL writer Jonathan Jones, who joins us on the phone. Jonathan, what does all this tell you?
Well, it tells me that, the NFL got it right the first time. Obviously, Myles had his appeal, as was his right. This punishment matches the crime. Going back to last week when we first talked about it, this was something that, while it had sort of been seen in the NFL before, it really had not. Yes, sure, guys had swung helmets before, and they had been punished appropriately. And this made a lot of sense that with 6 games left in the season, that he should not play the rest of the year. I fully expect that he will be available week 1 of the 2020 season. It should not affect his standing with the Cleveland Browns organization. But yeah, he had every opportunity to make his appeal, and obviously the NFL felt that the 6 games and the indefinite suspension was correct. And honestly, with the evidence that is in front of us all, that we all have seen, that at least we know about, that certainly makes sense to me.
What do you make of the reports that Mason Rudolph should be expected to be fined by the NFL, and the reports that came out earlier today that potentially a racial slur was used by Mason Rudolph, and that Myles Garrett just came out with this earlier this week and did not say anything about that after the game?
Yeah, so first I'll go with the Mason Rudolph, the fine. I think we all had been expecting that. Certainly what they did on the ground, what he did on the ground, I'm not over here trying to call him an angel or anything, or who instigated what, who shot JR, all that stuff, but he certainly did some things that, while we see it a lot on the football field on Sundays, he certainly did something that should draw a fine, and I think that we're going to see that. As it relates to the allegation that Myles Garrett reportedly used in his appeal, I do, obviously there is no evidence of that outside, that I know of, outside of what Myles Garrett had to say. Mason Rudolph has very strongly, through his agent and through the team, he has denied those accusations. Yesterday he was asked if anything that he said provoked Myles Garrett. He said no. If you look at the reports from the reporters in the Steelers and the Browns locker room, from the Steelers, all of his teammates all said that they didn't hear anything. The Browns players have all said that they did not hear anything. It does seem that a few of the Browns players said, I don't know Myles Garrett to be a liar. It is a very serious allegation, when you consider a white man using that word to a black man. It is a very, very serious allegation. And, I have no idea whether it was said or not. All I can go on is what everyone who was there can say. And right now, there's only one person that is saying that, and that apparently was Myles Garrett yesterday. But, you go to these NFL games and there are microphones all over. We don't know if one of those players were mic'd up, or if maybe an offensive lineman who was entangled and all that may have been mic'd up. If the NFL listened to audio, certainly they would have tried to find out had this been done through all technological means. But all those things said, again, it is a very serious allegation. And the fact is that only one person is saying it, and the people who were involved outside of Myles Garrett are saying that it did not happen.
He used that as a reason for his reaction, but apparently it didn't make any difference to the National Football League upholding that indefinite suspension for Myles Garrett. That's Jonathan Jones, senior NFL reporter for CBS Sports. I want to go to another one of our senior reporters, Pete Crisco. Pete, first off, just your reaction to the news today that Pouncey gets his 3-game suspension reduced to 2, but there is no reduction in the indefinite suspension to Myles Garrett.
It's probably the way it should have went. Pouncey was wrong. There's no doubt he was wrong in kicking, and when you do that, you're going to get a suspension. But 3 games was probably too much. As far as Garrett, look, it should have stood. What he did was heinous. It was disgusting. It was vile. It was all those words to describe an act that shouldn't find its way onto the football field So I'm glad the NFL upheld the suspension.
Visiting with our Pete Crisco about the Myles Garrett indefinite suspension being upheld. When the suspensions initially came out, there were a lot of people wondering why Mason Rudolph wasn't suspended. We get reports today that he is going to be fined by the National Football League, but we don't know how much. What do you think of that?
Well, I think he should be fined. I don't think there's any question about that. He should be fined because he had a part in the entire process, in the entire fight. So he should be fined. As far as the suspension, no. I don't think he should be suspended unless there are more to the allegations that we've heard this afternoon, which I find difficult to believe. But if there was more to those allegations that there was a racial slur used, then this is a bigger problem for Mason Rudolph than just some fight in a football game. And quite frankly, I can't wait to see how this plays out because those are very serious allegations.
As far as on the field, the Browns have won 2 straight. They're trying to put together a late run here to stay in the playoff race or get back into the playoff race. What does this do on the field to this team, losing Myles Garrett for the rest of the season?
Oh, it's a damning blow. He is their premier defensive player. He's an elite edge rusher in a league where you have to have them. And it's hard to replace that. And quite frankly, I don't think they can replace that. They're also going to be without Larry Ogunjobi for a game, and that'll hurt them as well. But again, it's a long shot for the Browns to make a run and get to the postseason, but it's hard to do when you don't have your best defensive player.
That's Pete Crisco. He'll be joining us again later on CBS Sports HQ. Thank you so much, Pete.
Well, still to come on HQ, we are going to dive much more into this Myles Garrett suspension upheld. What about Mason Rudolph? Is he going to face the right punishment? We're going to talk to Will Brinson after the break. And we continue to follow this breaking news here on HQ. Myles Garrett, his indefinite suspension upheld. He tried to appeal it yesterday in New York, but the league said no. The decision was right the first time. Of course, it all goes back to this Browns-Steelers game on Thursday Night Football, where Myles Garrett did just that. He took Mason Rudolph's helmet off his head and then swung it at him, making contact. A massive brawl ensued. 3 players were ejected. So here's what's happening today. The Myles Garrett suspension was upheld. We also saw some things change with the other players involved. Maurkice Pouncey, his 3-game suspension was reduced to 2. Larry Ogunjobi, his 1-game suspension was upheld, and we are expecting for Mason Rudolph to be fined. So let's bring in the host of the Pick 6 podcast, Will Brinson, to talk about this. So, Will, just your initial reaction. What do you think about it being upheld?
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying ever since the suspension was handed out that I didn't think there was a chance in Hades that Myles Garrett was going to have this reduced. The NFL, this became a CNN issue or a CBS News issue, if you will, where this is leading all the morning talk shows outside of the sports realm because of how violent and shocking it looked when you saw it on television. The NFL wanted to make sure it sent a message that wielding another player's helmet as a weapon against that player was not going to be an acceptable move to make, regardless of whatever claims you might make about what happened. And they were going to uphold this punishment. And I think you notice they didn't say like, hey, it's 6 games, it's 10 games. It's just indefinitely for the rest of the season. To me, that indicates clearly that they were going to be fine with him coming back in 2020, and that they don't want to deal with maybe the Browns make the playoffs. They give him 6 games and he gets to return for the playoffs and it's a huge deal, or they go 10 games and he misses and then he has to miss 4 games next year. So to me, this is a no-brainer situation. And the Pouncey reduction down to 2, they don't want Pouncey out there against the Browns when the 2 teams meet again in 2 weeks.
Yeah, let's talk about Mason Rudolph for a little bit. We're saying that he's expecting a fine. When this happened, a lot of people said, hey, look, he started this. He tried to take off Myles Garrett's helmet, and then obviously it went the other way. Do you think a fine is enough for Mason Rudolph?
Yeah, I'm fine with it. I could have gone either way on a suspension for Mason Rudolph. Wouldn't have been surprised if they gave him one, but I wasn't surprised they didn't give him one either. In the video, he is hit with his own helmet that another player is holding. This goes back to the middle school cafeteria. It doesn't matter what happens before the first punch is thrown. It matters who throws the first punch. That person is getting most of the punishment. In this case, it was Myles Garrett. Look, now, did Mason Rudolph act in a manner when he was pulled down that was probably inappropriate in terms of grabbing the helmet and using his foot to either push off or to jab at a private area of Myles Garrett? Perhaps. But I still think when you look at what went down, it was a no-brainer to suspend Myles Garrett, and anything else is just an ancillary situation where we shouldn't be shocked if it was, Larry Ogunjobi's reduced, Maurkice Pouncey's reduced, Mason Rudolph suspended, not suspended, whatever. To me, the crux of this was always Myles Garrett and how the NFL wanted to send a message to players about on-field behavior.
Well, after that game, Baker Mayfield, they won it, and he says, we won the game, but it feels like we lost, and it just kind of feels like the Browns are losing this entire season. Long-term for them, what does this mean? How do you move forward?
Well, look, it's a huge loss for them because they've been winning games based on defense, and Myles Garrett was trending towards being one of the top Defensive Player of the Year candidates. He was having a great season on the field, and to have this happen and to change the perception of him, it not only hurts Myles Garrett's long-term career prospects, it also hurts the Browns for the next 6 games. They're unlikely to make it to the playoffs. I mean, their chances are really low, but they do get the Bengals twice. They got other easy games on the schedule. They get to play Pittsburgh again. They could have run the table, and that would be, maybe that's the difference between getting in as a wild card or missing the playoffs. Maybe it's the difference between Freddie Kitchens keeping his job or not. Who knows? Remains to be seen. But I think losing Myles Garrett, at least for the rest of the season, and Larry Ogunjobi for 1 game, it's going to hurt the Browns a lot. I like the over in this Dolphins game because all the defensive players are either hurt or suspended. I think you see the Dolphins able to move the ball against Cleveland, and if their offense doesn't get clicking, they're really going to slide downhill even worse than they have been so far.
All right, we'll see if they can bounce back from this. That is Will Brinson. Thank you.
All right, recapping the news. Myles Garrett indefinite suspension upheld by the NFL. Mason Rudolph should expect a fine from the NFL, but no suspension. And Maurkice Pouncey had his 3-game suspension reduced to 2. We're going to have much more on this coming up throughout the afternoon right here on CBS Sports HQ.